So the National Reminder, it's a segment where we take you back to a big news item that drew more questions than answers. Today we focus on the sugar probe. It's a bittersweet trail that began with this.
When you see the reports that have come from chemical analysis that have been done, some of what we are selling around and mixing as sugar has got high contents of mercury, has got high contents of copper. No wonder you have the cases you have around the country, whether they are related to cancer or what have you. We have just been selling poison.
Well, that statement in June of this year came after over 1,000 bags of illegally imported sugar were found in a warehouse in Ureru. It caused quite a bit of confusion on the suitability of the country's sugar supply after CS Matiang'i's then trade counterpart, Aden Mohammed, disagreed on whether the sugar sacks contained mercury. What soon followed was a series of counter-accusations, denials, and withdrawals of claims from relevant bodies, the Kenya Bureau of Standards, even denying any mercury had been found in the samples seized. Now, the Joint Parliamentary Committee on Trade and Agriculture got involved and began probing the entry of contraband sugar into the market by grilling a number of sugar importers, cabinet secretaries for Agriculture, Treasury, Trade, and Interior, even going as far as inspecting go-downs in Mombasa, Nakuru, and Western Kenya. Now, Cabinet Secretary Matiang'i would make a U-turn when appearing before that very committee, saying the tests were inconclusive. Now, remember this guy. This is Charles Ongwae. He's the KEBS MD. Well, in a shock departure from KEBS claims, he told the MPs this.
Of the sugars that we tested, we did not find mercury. We have not said we did not find the other things.
And following that statement, he was arrested alongside other KEBS officials in connection with the scandal. The Ministry of Health, responding to Kenyans' fears, instructed public health officials in all 47 counties to test samples of all sugar being sold. Meanwhile, the Joint Parliamentary Committee tabled its preliminary report on the sugar probe. In that report, it found complicity on the part of government agencies, including KEBS, KRA, the Agriculture and Food Authority, and Ministries of Agriculture, Trade, and Treasury in the performance of their mandates. It also found the Treasury CS, Henry Rotich, had authorized imports that led to a market oversupply of more than 450,000 tons of sugar. It also said the trade CS, then Aden Mohammed, had failed to supervise KEBS, which falls under the ministry he ran, leading to imports of sugar that was not safe for human consumption. Now, the report would not go beyond the floor of Parliament after a barrage of criticisms led by Majority Leader Aden Duale and his minority counterpart John Mbadi, who essentially called the whole exercise a joke. Now, that report, of course, raising more questions than answers. Joining me in studio now, Steve Ogolla, who actually found a gap when it came to how the sugar probe was handled. And you noticed that the Parliament was not exercising its oversight role very well, Steve.
Thank you, Vicky. I think my first observation is that the sugar report by the Joint Committee on Trade and Agriculture ought to have failed, but not for the reasons preferred by Parliament. Why do I say so? If you look at Article 95.2 that frames the oversight mandate of Parliament and Standing Order number 216, the twin mandate of Parliament is to investigate for political accountability and legislative improvement. Political accountability because Parliament is part of the political wing of government. Its role is not to advise other agencies to recommend to other agencies to conduct further investigations. This report outlines 16 recommendations. 9 out of those 16 recommendations speak to further recommendations on further investigations. 3 of these recommendations speak to common sense observations that you don't need an entire committee sitting for over 20 days to come up with a recommendation that says, for instance, withdraw contaminated sugar from the market. That's a common sense observation that does not require. I think Parliament either has a compromised capacity, which means they were bribed and were unable to compile the report in the manner it was intended, or it has a confused understanding of their mandate. This report, as we know it, ought to have singled out. They have an excellent observation, but the recommendations are weak. There's no targeted recommendation that anyone can act upon in terms of political accountability. They should tell us who among the state officers and public officers was complicit in their duty. What is the targeted political action? The investigative agencies will, of course, investigate the matter as a matter of routine for criminal culpability, which means if there is evidence that can lead to prosecution, then prefer charges. But Parliament sat for over 20 days. They drew public money. They came up with a report that in essence just says, we recommend further recommendations for investigation. We recommend that sugar be withdrawn from the market. These are common sense observations that anybody seized of this matter would have said.
So do you feel that this is what led to the report being thrown out altogether because they did not exercise their oversight role?
No, that's not true. The report was thrown out because of some kind of maneuvers. You know, there were allegations that, if established, would really ruin the reputation of Parliament, that MPs were bribed. So interference was the reason why there was interference, their capacity was compromised. They didn't look at this report in detail. They didn't say that this report ought to have failed for failing to capture the limited mandate of Parliament. And I want to tell Kenyans that oversight has been dispersed. What is remitted to Parliament is oversight for political accountability. Whenever Parliament does any oversight role, they must tell us, this is a matter of public interest, this is the person culpable for political action. For criminal culpability, there are other investigative agencies. Then, as the law-making body, they should tell us how was the law manipulated? What are the gaps in the law so that they can tighten that law, so that in future, public and state officers do not find it easy to manipulate the law in a manner that is harmful to the people. So do you feel them directing these independent bodies to carry out investigations is Parliament's interference with their independent work? Was it intentional, or was it because they were not exercising their role very well at that time? Parliament should go slow in terms of directing other agencies. If you look at Article 249(2), for instance, independent offices and commissions do not take instructions from anyone. And that's a common sense approach. If you need investigation, see, when this matter breaks and the public is seized of it, every institution or organ of government has their limited mandate. The DCI and other investigative agencies have the mandate to investigate for criminal culpability. Parliament sits to investigate for political accountability. They are supposed to tell us who is it in the public and state office has breached public confidence, public trust. What is it? What are the remedial measures? You have no business sitting in a state of public office if it can be shown, even at a preliminary level, that you compromised your office. You allowed contaminated sugar into the country. The appointing authority, like in the instance of the CS, they did well in terms of observations. Observations were spot on. In terms of indicting CS Kinjuri and in terms of indicting CS Rotich, what they fell short of telling the president. So what happens now? What happens now, because you had mentioned in an article that the report was dead on arrival because they did not recommend political accountability. How do we come back from that and ensure that we do get answers? Did the sugar have mercury? How did contraband sugar enter into the market? How do we actually get answers to that? Do we go back to the drawing board? Actually, what I'd like to tell Kenyans is that if Parliament cannot perform their oversight mandate as is intended with the Constitution, Kenyans should know that oversight has actually been dispersed, and I want to direct this comment to the President. Under Article 10, the Constitution now requires a consultative, deliberative, and negotiated approach to government. Nothing stops the President from capturing the public views directly and saying that, seeing what I know, that the contaminated sugar was in the market, and Kenyans have consumed this sugar, the relevant minister, or cabinet secretary, is hereby fired. We don't need Parliament to say that. If Parliament can't give us that kind of recommendation, the President can intervene directly. But I think so far as it's going now, those officers that have been mentioned and are facing charges, I mean, this is a common sense, practical sense issue ordained by the Constitution. If you have a compromised capacity, meaning you're just corrupt, or you are grossly incompetent, that to allow contaminated sugar into the country, the only remedial measure you can take is to step aside. Article 73 requires that holders of public office be people that can bring dignity, honor, preserve confidence in those offices. We don't want people manipulating those offices to injure the public benefit. All right, Steve, let's see if the executive actually takes action on that. Thanks so much for coming.